Segregated from its history, How Ghetto Lost Its Meaning by Camilla Domonoski. In 1943, the word ghetto was used to describe restricted areas, walled-off areas where Jews were forced to live in Nazi Germany. Today, Twitter uses the word ghetto about 20 times per minute as a descriptive adjective, a fact which has made many cultural commentators speak out. As you read, take notes on how the word ghetto has evolved over time. The word ghetto as an etymological mystery. Is it from the Hebrew get, or bill of divorce? From the Venetian ghetto, or foundry? From the Yiddish gehitas, enclosed? From the Latin geodia ectum, for Jewish? Or from the Italian borghetto, little town? From the Old French guet, which is guard? In his entomology column for the Oxford Dictionary Press, Anatoly Liberman took a look at each of these possibilities. He considered evermore the improbable origins, Latin for ribbon, German for street, Latin for to throw, before declaring the word a stubborn mystery. But whatever the root language, the word's original meaning was clear: the quarter in a city, chiefly in Italy, to which the Jews were restricted. As the OED puts it, in 16th and 17th centuries, cities like Venice, Frankfurt, Prague, and Rome forcibly segregated their Jewish populations, often walling them off and submitting them to onerous restrictions. By the late 19th century, these ghettos had been steadily dismantled, but instead of vanishing from history, ghettos reappeared. With a purpose more ominous than segregation under Nazi Germany, Germans forces established ghettos in over 1,000 cities across Europe. They were isolated, strictly controlled, and resource deprived, but unlike the ghettos of history, they weren't meant to last. Reviving the Jewish ghetto made genocide a much simpler project. As the Holocaust proceeded, ghettos were emptied by the trainload. The prisoners of the enormous Warsaw Ghetto, which at one point held 400,000 Jews, famously fought the deportation to death camps. They were outnumbered and undersupplied, but some managed to die on their own terms. Thousands of Jews were killed within the walls of the ghetto rather than in the camps. Jewish ghettos were finally abolished after the end of the World War II, but the word lived on, redefined as a poor urban Black community. From anti-Semitism to race and poverty. As early as 1908, ghetto was sometimes used metaphorically to describe a slum area that weren't mandated by law, but that were limited to a single group of people because of other constraints. That year, Jack London wrote The Working Class of Ghetto. Immigrant groups and American Jews were also identified as living in these unofficial ghettos. Even as those areas were identified, they were already transforming. A 1928 study, American Jewish Ghettos, explained why such communities were being invaded by people of color. The Negro, like the immigrant, is segregated in the city into a racial colony. Economic considerations, race, prejudice, and cultural differences combine to set him apart. Race prejudice included laws and lending practices, from redlining to restrictive covenants, explicitly designed to separate whites and non-white city dwellers. After World War II, white flight from inner cities further exacerbated racial segregation. By the 1960s and 1970s, the so-called Negro ghettos in cities like Chicago, New York, and Detroit were central to the cultural conversation about poverty. Something must be done, and done soon, to build a strong and stable family structure among Negro ghetto dwellers. An Ebony editorial contended in 1966. Countless academic articles argued about the cause of ghetto poverty. And in 1969, Elvis, in his late career comeback, took a turn from the mournful with In the Ghetto. Elvis and many cover singers after him sings about Chicago's crowded Black ghettos with an outsider's concern. People, don't you understand? The child needs a helping hand, or he'll grow to be angry young man someday. Almost half a century later, Busta Rhymes used the same song title to celebrate the ghetto as a source of identity. Busta Rhymes doesn't ignore the painful effects of the intergenerational poverty, but he's not calling for help or claiming that all ghetto dwellers are miserable. The ghetto is also where you find beautiful women and rugrats, and some of the most powerful people. I love that. Ghetto, not so fabulous. Ghettos were always defined by a lack of choice. They were places inhabitants were forced to live, whether by anti Semitic governments, discriminating neighbors, or racist practices like redlining. Sociologist Mario Small argues that these limits have largely been lifted, such as the researchers should no longer consider ghetto a useful word for urban slums. And indeed, use of the word ghetto in print has been declining since the early 1970s, but slang variants have been rising in popularity since before the turn of the millennium. And a quick glance at social media suggests they're not going away. On a recent weekday, Twitter used the reference to ghetto almost 20 times per minute. Being ghetto or behaving in a low class manner, see also ratchet. Ghetto fabulous, flashy glamour without the wealth. Ghetto as an adjective, roughly synonymous with jury rigged for anything cobbled together out of subpar material. Many commentators have objected to these terms. Using ghetto as an insult is, as our own Karen Grisby Gates has pointed out, inherently classist. Ta Coates once wore that ghetto in its most unironic usage is a word for people you don't know. It's a word that allows you to erase individuals and create boxes, and that arguments that the terms are neutral are, well, unconvincing. This current use of ghetto is also curiously mismatched to the history of ghettos. Venice's ghettos were home to prosperous merchants. Warsaw ghettos housed resistance fighters. Harlem was a ghetto when it hosted transformative literary and cultural movement. Chicago's Bronzeville was home to the Black professional class. Ghettos, by removing citizens' freedom to live where they want, forced school teachers next to drug dealers, working families next to brothels. But slang references to ghetto culture don't refer to any of those legacies or to the perseverance it takes to survive such limitations. You survive in the ghetto, raps Busta Rhymes. You can make it anywhere. Instead, they reduce ghetto to a life of poverty, poor behavior, acting ghetto, being ghetto, dressing ghetto. Ghetto in slang usage has entirely lost the sense of forced segregation, the meaning it held for centuries in rapid about face. It's become an indictment of individual choices.